Hello guys, my name is Miss Fagan and I'm going to be starting to teach you during our lockdown 3.0 about our new unit of work that we would have done if we were at school. This new unit of work is on Elizabeth I. So, Elizabeth is remembered as being one of the best monarchs England ever had. Not only was she a woman at a time where many thought men were stronger and more powerful and the only ones able to do such a job, but she ruled for longer than any of her predecessors, created the very first welfare state in England, arguably where the NHS came from, and fought off the greatest threat to England's independence than we'd seen in quite a long time, the Spanish Armada. The first thing we need to do is to try to make clear Elizabeth's background. Who was she? Where did she come from? So Elizabeth was one of three siblings, and she had two half-siblings. She was the second oldest child, and her older sister, Mary, and her younger brother, Edward. Now, all three of them are the children of Henry VIII, probably one of the most well-known kings England ever had. And all three of them rule England at different times during this Tudor dynasty. Okay, so I've just got a little family tree here to try and show you how it works. So we have Henry VII, who was the first Tudor king who fought in the Wars of the Roses against the Yorks. He married Elizabeth of York, the Yorkist princess, and he had two sons, Arthur and Henry. Henry VIII then goes on to become the famous king we know, and he's the one that married all of the 6 different women, and then he had 3 children from each different wife. So Mary was first, then Elizabeth, and then Edward. Okay, so these are kind of, well, she is the person we really, really care about for this learning video, but Henry is her father. So Henry VIII became king in 1509 when his father Henry VII died. Now Henry had an older brother, Arthur, who married Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, to cement an alliance between England and Spain. And Arthur was the one who was supposed to be king next, who was assumed would be king next. However, Arthur died 7 years before Henry took the throne. So when Henry was 18 himself, he was suddenly the next in line to the throne. Not only that, but suddenly he had a situation where the Spanish alliance had fallen apart. And so after some careful negotiation, Henry married Catherine himself, and the Spanish alliance was saved, and England had a new, very young king with his new Spanish bride. Catherine and Henry were married for 23 years, and many historians talk of the very real love they shared with each other. She had a son in 1510, Henry. However, he sadly died 2 months later. She also had 2 other sons who also died shortly after birth. In 1516, she had her only surviving child, Mary, the only child of hers who was to live until adulthood. Despite the fact that Henry professed his love for her, he did seek the Pope's approval for an annulment. Now, an annulment is where you would be able to dissolve the marriage, because Henry is a Catholic, like much of Europe at the time, and you are not legally allowed to divorce as a Catholic country. It's against the rules of Catholicism. So the Pope, Henry, could not physically get divorced while his country remained Catholic. So he's faced with a bit of a problem, but he writes to the Pope to ask for this annulment under kind of special grounds, because he believes that he has broken God's word. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, in a section called Leviticus, God talks about how you should not take your brother's wife. And he sees this, and actually God writes, that the Bible writes that if you do take your brother's wife, you'll remain childless. And for Henry, that is the justification, the legitimization of the fact that he does not have a living male heir. He disregards Mary. Mary is a daughter. Mary doesn't matter so much. He needs a son. He needs a son to be an heir to the throne and take the throne after him. So he writes to the Pope asking for this annulment. I've taken my brother's wife. I've broken the word of the Bible. I've broken Leviticus. This is why I haven't had a son. I need to be God's dutiful servant. I need to have a divorce. And so that I'm kind of, forgiven in the eyes of the Lord. However, the Pope refuses to grant this annulment. The Pope was written to in the very first instance when Henry married Catherine, and he asked for a special dispensation, special permission to marry her because she was his brother's wife, and the Pope gave it to them. So the Pope's kind of saying, well, no, you asked me in the first place, and I said yes. You can't now take that back when it doesn't suit you. Henry is not allowed his divorce. He can't get rid of Catherine. He has to stay married. And at the same time, one of her kind of ladies in waiting, a lady of the court, a lady of noble birth, starts to catch his eye. And that lady is Anne Boleyn. So Anne is quite a high-born noble in English society. She comes from quite a good family, and she's their family is very, very wealthy. However, she's not, a foreign princess or anything, and Henry still has a wife, more to the point. Now, Henry regularly took mistresses. They're women who he's not married to, but he would kind of, enjoy time with. And he thought that, if he could do this with Anne, it would kind of be enough, I guess, for him. It wouldn't really solve the son problem, but it would be enough for now. However, Anne refuses to become Henry's mistress. And he begins to see her as kind of the answer to all of his problems. She's new, she's young, he's in love with her. He really wants to take her to bed, essentially. And she's not allowing him to do that until they are married. So Henry really at this point is trying to find a solution to kind of get rid of Catherine and take Anne as his new wife. Now, this begins an extremely significant event in English history, the English Reformation, the break from the Catholic Church. Today, our Queen is the head of the Protestant Church of England, and the reason for that, the reason why English monarchs and England as a whole in terms of its monarchy and kind of that point has been Protestant for most of kind of recent history, the last 500 years or so. Now, obviously, we have lots of diversity in England and people practice lots of different religions. But if we look to the state, to the country, to the monarchy, they are the head of the Protestant church. And that all comes from Henry. So England, like the rest of Europe, was Catholic, for this time and for all the time beforehand, really. And Catholicism is a type of Christianity that followed the Pope. It does not allow divorce, and it meant the Pope had control over lots of decisions that took place in your country. The marriage to Catherine was declared null and void by Henry himself, and he just took Anne and married her. He made Archbishop Cranmer, who was the highest religious authority in England, to declare this marriage null and void, and he made Archbishop Cranmer marry him and Anne. Now, that is going completely against the Pope, and it signalled the break from the Roman Catholic Church. Henry then goes on to create the Church of England, which he is the head of, which he can make all decisions about, and that's the moment England became a Protestant country. Now, not only did the religion for Henry change, but that meant that the religion for everyone in the country has changed. And it meant that Elizabeth's birth became seen to represent this turmoil and chaos that ensued. Catholics all over the country were suddenly not allowed to practice their faith anymore. Church services are read in English, not in Latin. Pilgrimages and saints' days are cancelled. One of the worst things for the ordinary people was that Henry started to shut down and dissolve the monasteries. Now, the monasteries were places where monks and religious men lived and worked kind of to keep their religious order alive. And they also offered welfare, food and shelter for local communities. Now, to shut those down meant that effectively there was no longer anywhere to go if you were starving, if you didn't have anywhere to live. All of this was put upon Elizabeth and her mother, because while her mother was the woman who kind of, tempted Henry away from Catholicism and into this new church. Elizabeth was the visual proof of that split. She was the child that had come out of this marriage. Anne, Henry's new queen, did not manage to fulfill the promises she had made. She gave birth to Elizabeth, her only living child, Henry's second daughter. She had a couple of other pregnancies, but none of them produced a living child. She did have one son who did not survive very long. She was executed by Henry for adultery and witchcraft when Elizabeth was 2 years old. Elizabeth grew up almost forgotten. Aged 4, she commented to her governor, "How haps it, governor? Yesterday, my lady princess, today, my lady Elizabeth." What insight this little girl had into the political surroundings that were around her, that she suddenly had fallen from grace so quickly, and she could tell so. So Elizabeth's mother has been executed, and she is left pretty much with her governess to get on with her life. So because of this start and this upbringing that she had to go through, her reputation is forever surrounded with humiliation and scandal. Her mother had been declared an adulteress. That means she had cheated on her father, she had had sex with somebody else, and she had been declared by her own father a bastard, the word for a child whose parents are not legally married. This was really, really bad at the time because a bastard could not inherit the throne. So effectively, he was taking his own daughter out of the line of succession, out of the line of who was going to be king or queen next. This was a problem for Elizabeth when she took the throne, as many could have criticised her legitimacy and said that she was not allowed to rule. She doesn't have the legal backing to rule. She could have faced uprisings and rebellions because of that. She was brought up as a member of the royal court. She was taught a variety of subjects and proved herself to be highly intelligent. She often shared tutors of her younger brother, Edward. She was multilingual, she could speak multiple languages, and was very skilled in literature and the classics. Her father remarried shortly after the execution of her mother to a lady called Jane Seymour, who gave birth to his long-awaited son, Edward, Elizabeth's younger brother. On her father's death, her brother Edward became king, as is the law, where the son, the male heir, inherits above any girls, even if he's not the oldest. So he was the youngest child, but he inherits the throne first. So Edward becomes king. However, he's only 9 years old. So the country is run by his uncle, the Duke of Somerset. Edward died in 1553, only 6 years after he took the crown. The throne then passed to Elizabeth's half-sister and older sister, Mary. Mary also died without children. And so in 1558, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn, the youngest of all 3 Tudor children, became Queen of England. She was 25 years old and needed to establish her authority. Not only was she young, she was a woman. Her sister Mary had not done a very good job at being queen. She had married King Philip of Spain, who had concerned England very much. They really did not want to become a Spanish colony controlled by Spain. So Elizabeth knew she had a lot to prove.